How do you build $1 billion company from scratch? How do you ignite that fire in yourself to make something crazy happen? I have today Rishi Khosla, MBE, on my podcast, who's going to share with you how he did it. His insights will make you better at business. Enjoy.
Rishi, thank you for joining us today. I know how busy you are, and I've personally been researching you quite heavily the last few days, and I'm kind of in awe at what you've achieved. But I think for those that don't know you, that are listening to this podcast today, would you mind just telling them a little bit about yourself in your own words?
Sure. Where do you want to start?
Well, why don't you start from where you are today backwards, like your bank business that you're presently running?
Backwards.
Yes.
Right. Love working backwards. So right now today, 7 years into building a company called OakNorth, a digital bank focused on larger SMEs, so larger small mid-sized companies in the UK. We've helped through our activities drive about 37,000 new jobs, about 26,000 sort of affordable homes in the country. That's been a journey over the last 7 years. If I go before that, my co-founder and myself had built a business, financial research business, up to about 3,000 people, and we'd sold that to a group called Moody's, a rating agency. And if I worked before that, started a sort of venture capital. Prior to that, investment banking, and then prior to that, academia. Glorious place to be, by the way, academia. So London School of Economics, before that UCL, and sort of prior sort of other education in the UK as well.
So those that are listening to this on Spotify, by the sounds of that description, you sound about 80. But, you know, I think startup life is treating you well. I'm going to position you at 32.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you.
In true humble style, you haven't even really mentioned your own business, OakNorth. Can you talk a little bit about how you managed to start a bank? I'm sure there's plenty of people listening that are dreaming right now of opening up their own digital bank. How did you do it?
So it's interesting. So I've been working with my co-founder now for 21 years. And so our first business we started in 2002 and sold in 2014. When we were coming up to selling that business and we had the idea of setting up a bank, it was a preposterous idea, right? Because the UK hadn't had a lot of new banks set up. I think at that point it only had one in the last 150 years. So the idea of actually saying let's go and set up a bank was somewhat crazy and bold, and that's what got us excited about it. And we started sort of peeling away at that idea, and the more we looked, just also given sort of a change in the approach of the government and Bank of England to actually getting more competition into banking, we were like, hang on, maybe that, like, this is a good time. So we said to ourselves, you know what, let's roll up our sleeves and see if we can do this. And like with all great ideas, when you come up with them and then tell other people what you're thinking of doing, they tell you you're crazy, right? And like, why would you do that? And no one does that. And you know, it's like, it's not the thing to do, and that gives you more conviction that actually, you know what, there may be something here. So that's what happened. And neither my co-founder or myself had a banking background in terms of commercial banking, and therefore learning like the ins and outs, like we always say, the closest we've been to sort of that world was getting kicked out of HSBC branch, which was driven by the fact that they didn't want to lend to us like several years earlier, right? So the fact of actually going into a space where you don't necessarily have background and being willing to work on first principles to actually just understand things and asking the obvious questions actually is incredibly enlightening. So what generally happens is you go into a space and you sort of say you need subject matter experts, right? And you do need some level of subject matter experts. But what happens with that is that you get blinkered and you sort of say, I don't have experience in that space. But the more experience you have, the more of a fixed view you have into that particular industry and what the client's desires are, or sometimes they don't even care about the clients because they just focus on how do they make money out of the client, right? Whereas Joel and I, our approach was very much, we experience pain in terms of as a customer, and we said to ourselves, we want to create an institution which actually solves for that pain, and everything was driven around how do we create the best experience for that customer. And we were willing to ask really stupid questions, and some of those really stupid questions actually enabled us to do things very differently, and therefore that drove us in terms of actually getting conviction that we can build this digital bank in a totally different way to actually service our clients in a totally different way, and delighting clients generally hopefully leads to a good business.
There's so many things there you said I don't want people listening to miss. I think the ultimate concept of like, you don't need experience in something necessarily to build something in that space. Like Elon Musk probably knew nothing about space. Now he knows a lot. Got a lot of experts around him. Nothing about building cars, really, right? You almost have the vision, almost the center purpose first, and then build the infrastructure around it to solve that problem for the customers.
Yeah, but I'd actually add on top of that, which is you don't need to have the experience. And sometimes having that experience actually hinders you on being able to be innovative in that space, because if you have the experience, you've got someone else's playbook, right? And the industry playbook, and therefore your ability to think outside of those constraints is much harder. When you don't have that playbook, you're willing to ask the stupid questions. You're willing to just like start with a blank sheet of paper, and therefore that drives you to getting different potential outcomes and be much more innovative than not.
Again, it's not said enough. I think you're so right that sometimes ignorance is useful. That not having all the barriers in front of you why you can't do something because you're not in the industry. I started a creative agency. Originally, I wanted to go work for Ogilvy, but they wouldn't give me a job. So glad they didn't. And I then competed against them in a way because I didn't know their internals. I didn't know how they thought about things. We came at it simply from the client point of view. What did the client want to see? And so it's really fascinating. So when you said, right, what came first? The idea of all the problems you wanted to solve for customers, or the idea of doing a bank? And then what sort of bank would it be?
I mean, definitely the idea of the problems we want to solve, because the original seed idea of actually establishing OakNorth was an experience that my co-founder and I had whilst we were building our previous business, getting kicked out of not just one, but probably a couple of commercial banks, right? That was the trigger, and that was actually back in 2005-06 that we had that experience, and we went and sold our business in 2014. So the seed of the idea that actually something's wrong here, right? And there needs to be a better offering for scale-up companies, for companies which are in growth mode, to enable that. Was something which we'd realized then. And as I said, we then went through the journey with that company. And then when we were coming to sell it, that's when we came back to that and said, like, is that a structural issue? If it is a structural issue, what can we do to actually help solve that?
So you have this idea of the problems you want to solve for customers. You decided a bank is the best vehicle in which to do it. What's your first few hires? How do you make it a reality?
What were the first few hires? So we did start from the perspective of saying, okay, if we're going to do this, we probably need some people who sort of know how commercial banks work, right? Because that would be somewhat useful. And let's be clear,
by the way, it's a really good point there. You can hire the knowledge when you need it. Perhaps having it in the room at the beginning is detrimental, because they'll tell you all the reasons you can't do what you want to do.
And,
right?
and let's be clear. So we hired people with knowledge, and they started telling us all the reasons why we can't do what we're suggesting, right? And what we said is, why, right? It's like the 5 whys. You keep on pushing on it, and normally after the second or third why, you realize there's no good argument, right? And then you actually just work from first principles again. And generally, especially when you go into a regulated industry like banking, the regulator gets sounded quite often as a reason why you can't do something. So our approach was, well, we'll just go and ask the regulator, right? So we'll sort of do our homework, we'll work on first principles, then we'll just go and ask the regulator. And we found the regulator to be immensely open and helpful, actually, in those discussions. So the first hires were people with experience. we were fundamentally the entrepreneurs, right? But what we weren't willing to do is then get constrained by sort of that industry expertise. We were willing to push through that.
And so where was it, what point was it that you committed to it and there was no turning back? I mean, did you put your own money in? Did you raise money? How did it play out? Like a little bit of a, I think people listening, I want them to understand how something crazy can get done, you know, like in a practical sense.
Sure. So let me answer that in the context of OakNorth, but I think it's almost more interesting to answer that in the context of our first company, Copal. So in the context of OakNorth, we did put our own money in, right? And so the first money which went in was ours. And then we got friends and family to effectively commit, but we said we're not going to draw down any of that capital till we got licensed, right? So effectively all the pure risk capital is always our risk, right? Because you're building, but like the very, very high risk was our own capital, right? And at what point did we sort of start putting money in? I mean, you start putting money in as soon as you need to with that. Real money started going in when we started hiring, right? But let me flip back to the first business, because by the time we started OakNorth, we had a few pennies in our pocket, right? When we started Copal, we didn't. Not as great as your story, by the way, because, you know, your story is very, very cool, because you literally didn't have a penny, right? But when we started Copal, we had no real money behind us. And in that context, Joel and I got together. Joel was living in the US at that point. He came over for a few weeks just to effectively brainstorm and sort of just like, you know, kick around the idea. And we started doing that. And then we started going to, there's a financial research company, to people that we thought were knowledgeable in the space. And, you know, through that, we ended up just picking up our first client, right? Again, unfortunately, we didn't have a camera crew in the middle of the street who came up to us and sort of became our first client, like some of the videos that you showed me earlier. But we ended up picking up our first client, and then we were like, I guess we're in business, right? So it was very much think of the idea, get a straw man, start putting some meat across on it, and then go and test with different people. And then we picked up our first client. We were like, okay, that's quite cool. Let's keep on going. And then we picked up our second client. And that's literally how we built that business. And then we said, okay, let's put some money into this. And between ourselves and friends and family, we put a total of £180,000 into the business. And the company ended up only using £40,000. Copal. The company ended up using only £40,000 to build up to 3,000 people.
And where did that original money come from, that original capital?
That 180,000. Again, some of it was from us, and then some of it was from friends and family.
I think someone in the audience just asked me, they've got a business idea and they wanted to get my help, and I will help you, launch their business. But I think you've just said something there that might really help that person, which is, you know, like he's quite scared to share his idea, which I think is a natural instinct for entrepreneurs when you have a great idea. But I think what I take from what you've said, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that, this is what I believe anyway, that you have an idea. Best thing to do is try and share it with a few potential customers. Because if one of them says yes, you can charge them a 50% invoice and you're away. You've got a client,
Totally.
You're getting paid, right?
Totally.
So sometimes keeping the idea quiet and pitching it to investors to get investors, and that getting them to sign an NDA and all, you're better off spending all that time just getting a customer. Not always, but 90% of the time.
Look, if it's a business which enables you to get a customer off the bat, 100%, right? Because ultimately for any business, the best validation you can have is, are you actually delivering to a customer pain point? Are you actually delivering value to your customer, right? Without getting a sense of that, you have a hypothesis, but you haven't tested the hypothesis. And the best proof of testing a hypothesis is to do exactly that, right? So I think that no matter how much research you do, etc., like the most real thing is someone actually going to buy what you're selling?
Yeah, and
right?
ironically, they'll help you get an investor too, because the investor
Totally.
sees you've got clients, then it helps.
It's much more real.
Yeah. So I know you can't talk about how much you sold Copal for. That's been asked of you many times. I would love an exclusive. We could probably get it in the Sun tomorrow. You know, it would be headlines. But feel free to drop it. But no, joking aside, I think, when you sold the company, and I've sold a company, so I had this feeling, but I was just interested in how you felt when you sold it. How did you get motivated to do this business? Surely, I know when you sold it initially, you must have done an earn out, because on your CV it says you had a year as chairman. They moved you from CEO, chairman, CEO. So there was an earn out period or something like that. But I don't know, just looking at the paperwork, it's weird.
Sure.
So maybe tell us what happened in that period and your feeling.
So actually we didn't have an earn out period. What we did is we sold a portion of the business, and then we had a put and call structure for the balance of the business. So we effectively did a partial sale and then a complete sale, but we kept operational autonomy during that period. So selling the business, I have to say that the day that we sold the business and the transaction was closed, was a really challenging day. I remember very vividly. So we went through what was it, 72 to 80 hour session to get the deal closed, straight through. So it was like, I think it was like,
by the end of it, you're signing anything.
Yes. Well, let me put it this way. We actually, I think we started on the Tuesday, and we said we're not going to leave until we get this deal done. And I think, no, actually, we slept the Tuesday night. Wednesday we went back, and Wednesday we went through till Friday then. Yeah, right?
It's good that you can remember it.
And we started with probably over 30 people in the room. We ended up on Friday morning with, I think, about 4 or 5 of us sort of still standing. So that was incredible. But then I had a whole schedule of meetings, and that was in New York. And then I had a whole schedule of client meetings in Hong Kong starting on the Monday, right? So I remember leaving New York and then making my way out to Hong Kong and getting into Hong Kong and going for a walk when I got in. And it was just like an incredibly challenging point, because actually we'd spent 12 years building this business, and we felt like we built a great business, doing great things for our clients, and suddenly it's no longer yours, right? We'd already spent the time thinking about what was next, so we'd already started working on OakNorth. That's when I was chairman of OakNorth. So that's yes. So when we started OakNorth, I was chair of OakNorth, and then when we fully exited Copal, then became CEO, right? So that exactly. But we were clear that, like, there is no how can I put it? Like, that was for us hopefully the warm-up act, right? And now we wanted to build, even though that scaled to a reasonable level, right? We want to build something which has significantly more scale, right? So if I think about what we've been able to achieve over the last 7 years, we're probably at more than 3 times the scale in 7 years than what we built over 12 years with Copal.
As a compound of your knowledge as well, right?
Well, I call it luck.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's a good word.
Yeah. I really think, there's, I was having this conversation with an entrepreneur yesterday. There's a certain amount of experience, knowledge, pure grit, right? And sort of that hunger, which I think is just so essential to drive any entrepreneur. But then on top of everything, 99% of it has to be luck, right? Because ultimately you can work incredibly hard and not get anywhere. But actually, if you don't put the grit in, right? I don't think I think you won't get the luck.
Yeah. Do you think there's well, I mean, there is a saying, is that the harder you work, the luckier you get. I think that's slightly off, because I know a lot of people who work very hard and don't get lucky. But I think,
but how many people do you know who get lucky and haven't worked hard?
These days, surprisingly, a lot of people, they buy Bitcoin or something. Like they just buy it.
These days or those days?
Yeah, a year ago maybe. But I think there is. I think that the probably more accurate, which links to what you're saying, which is kind of the more risk you take, the luckier you get. So I think you probably went bigger in a way on this risk. You're doing a bank that there's that's a whole different level, isn't it? And so the risk as well with a license and all that, I guess, financial higher risk, potentially regulatory higher risk. And so I think the more risk you take, the luckier you get. But I think, is there any one particular, because I love luck, by the way, I'm obsessed with luck. It's a thing I find, the secret ingredient you can't easily teach someone. So do you think there was what one moment in this business was like, wow, that didn't happen? The license, I'm sure you're going to say, getting the license, but then again, you probably made that happen by doing a proper pitch. But what lucky moments do you think you could identify in your career that if they hadn't happened, you wouldn't be sitting here on stage with me today?
I mean, look, there's so many, right? I think that it's sort of, as I always say, the first thing I do every morning is I just show gratitude, right? Because I think despite, like, it doesn't matter if you're having a rough day or a good day, right? Just showing that gratitude and being humble from that perspective is just so important. And I think we all experience a certain amount of luck every single day, right? Are there specific pivot points? I mean, so many, right? And are there many points where you just say, what in the hell are you doing? Why did you ever start this? And like, you know, as I've said before, in the early days of Copal, it's like I literally used to bite my towel every morning as hard as I could to get ready for the day, right? Because it just took so much out of you. And the first 2+ years of Copal, our total revenue was lower than the salary which I was used to taking, right? And we weren't paying ourselves anything, right? So you sort of think about that, and everyone around you saying, like, you're crazy, what are you doing, right? Just madness, right? I mean, why did you leave why did you leave a great job? Why did you leave this? Why did you leave that? And you just have to have that conviction, and that's why I go back to having that fire in your belly, having that hunger is just so important, because just driving yourself to actually, you know, achieve the goals that you've set out. The only way you can do that is if you've got absolute conviction and self-belief.
For people listening, how do they get that fire? How did you get that fire?
I mean, I was always convinced that I wanted to build businesses, right? I wanted to go through that process. Again, I'd say, frankly, also, I'd say between the first business, between Copal, it was just build a business, right? In OakNorth, it's build a business which does good, right? Which is an evolution. Then sort of saying, keep on hypothesizing, keep on driving sort of different ideas. Once you lock on an idea, go and test it, go and sort of build. As you get belief in it, you have to have sort of single-minded belief, right, that you're actually going to drive and achieve, and then like your whole focus, all of your energy needs to be actually making that happen. So putting that all together is how, like, the hunger comes from just the continuous drive to want to actually achieve and sort of deliver. But then you need to have absolute conviction around the idea.
Do you think an element of your childhood plays a part? Like, for example, I've got a 5-year-old, and I'm always thinking about like how to not make him spoil. You know, like I was kicked out of home at 15, and I now look at that as good luck. Right, back to luck. So luck is a matter of perspective, isn't it?
Yes, totally.
But I was kicked out of home at 15, and I'm so grateful because that pushed me into the world, and then I had to start a business because I couldn't get a job. But I wonder, like, with your own upbringing, you know, does the fire begin there? Were your parents entrepreneurial? Did you see them struggle? What were the things that maybe gave that initial spark to you?
So fully. I saw my parents struggle. I mean, my father used to work incredibly hard, and then he set up his own business, which he used to literally do in the evenings. And then I used to see him like working till 1 a.m., 2 a.m. every morning. And then he'd be back on the train at like 7 a.m. For the job which he had. He'd work all weekends. And so you see that, and you sort of say to yourself, like, okay, this is what it takes, right? So fully, I mean, I used to go and sit in his office from the age of 6, right? And
what did he do?
He's a chartered engineer, so mechanical electrical engineering, so building services equipment, supplying for various manufacturers across the world. So that just taught me a lot about ethics, taught me a lot about sort of, again, that drive, etc. But then I started with a 10x ambition, and then that 10x goes to another 10x, and then goes to another 10x. So
I think, well, that's part of the game, I guess, isn't it? It's like,
totally.
If you're going to do it again, you've got to do it bigger. And I love your point about adding purpose on top, which I think people can do earlier than they think. Like, a for-profit business that has purpose will attract more talent.
Yep.
Will keep you motivated. I actually think it's something I wish I could give to younger people when they're starting businesses, that thing you've learned by doing one business and then going again, right? Purpose.
I think it's also an evolution in my view, just in terms of like the awareness, right? Around
as a human, you mean, what people need.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think what we call it at OakNorth is sort of being socially minded, right? Which is, how do you actually just treat your customers, your partners, your teams in the way that you would want to be treated, right? And that's something which,
sounds like common sense, really, but for some reason it's not happening enough in society.
But if you think about, if you go back 30 years ago, right, very few organizations were all about how can you extract the maximum out of a customer? How can you sort of squeeze your suppliers to the maximum, right? Even today, if you have a look at sort of payment terms from larger companies to smaller companies, they're not great, right? So the smaller companies are effectively providing working capital through to the larger businesses, right, as a function of being paid on a delayed basis. So all of those things are just, like, in our view, not great ways to actually build business in a community. So your point about entrepreneurs being able to think that way from day one, absolutely. I think, as I said, I think the awareness of those aspects is just totally different to what it was.
I know this is personal, so I don't feel to ask, but your mother's role, I mean, how was that dynamic in the household?
I mean, again, look, both my mother worked with my father in the business, so she actually helped build my father's business as well. She used to work and obviously raise us. So she had an incredibly strong role as well within that. And again, just that discipline, right? And for them, their whole life was just work and the family.
Mm. I've interviewed over 200 people. I've just started to see a trend in the family dynamic when people are growing up. Like, if people have seen their parents have hardship and push through that hardship, it almost gives them that fire.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I like, I don't know, you've got 4 children, so
yes.
I don't know how you have. I've got 1, I'm tired, but 4 children and a bank to run. I don't know how you do it, but one of the things
and a wife.
And a wife, yeah. Well, I was going to. Did you bring him into the business? How did you learn from your family?
How can I put it? She works at she does some work around corporate social responsibility with us, but generally, she's sort of,
yeah. Well, it's a full-time job, right?
There you go.
But you're counsellor, I'm sure, as well.
Exactly.
I work with my wife too, funnily enough. And you did another thing I don't want the listeners to miss. And now I know when talking about selling a business that might seem so far away for a lot of people that are listening, especially if they're starting out, like the idea of selling is perhaps never. Which, by the way, is probably a good strategy, don't you think? Like,
totally.
Building a business to sell it, there's no way you would have worked 12 years if all you were thinking about in the first 2-3 years of that business was, I'm going to sell it, right?
That's some very strong views on this, but carry on.
Yeah, no, tell me. Share your views.
So our view, again, both of Joel and I, my business partner, is that when you build a business, you build it as if you're going to own it for life, right? Because if you build a business on the basis of wanting to sell it, you're never going to build it, right? You're never going to build it the right way. So you build it as if you're going to own it for life. And then, I mean, is something for sale at the right price? Most things are for sale, right? So that was our attitude. Even when we consummated the deal that we did, we weren't in a position to say we have to sell the business. We were in a position, I mean, actually exactly the opposite, because the previous year, the same party had actually made a bid, right? And then they wanted to close on a different basis to the bid they made. And it was like a 3-minute conversation to say, thank you, let's stay in touch, we're not interested, right? And a year later, they came back and they paid more than what they were originally in for. And and because we were in a position of actually, we're happy to continue building this business, and we built the foundations incredibly strongly where we don't need to sell, we were able to do that. And then
I hope people listen to this
for the right deal.
I know you've invested in PayPal, so I'd like to talk about that in a minute, and invested in some big businesses, I know. But, so many people pitch their business as, we're going to build it and then X is going to buy it. And that actually puts investors off, right? It's like, you might be stuck with it.
Totally.
And then what? And the negotiational point you're making as well, I had exactly the same thing. PwC bought my business.
Right.
And initially, I didn't want to sell it. That was the best place to start a negotiation. And so, I think it's so valuable. But I guess you did something else that I didn't do, which I think might be valuable for people to not miss on, which is when you did decide to sell, and that process was, you started something else. I didn't. I felt real seller's remorse after I sold the company. I was lost for a while personally. It's kind of amazing that you had something else to then go get your teeth stuck into. Yeah. I guess that was also the motivation to go and do it, because there must have been the temptation to say, well, I've just sold this company, I've made all this money, and I'll just take some time out. After 12 years of biting on the towel, there must have been that instinct in you for a little bit.
No.
Not even a moment.
No.
Were you married at that point, by the way?
Yeah.
Did you have any kids at that point?
Yeah.
There wasn't that conversation like, why don't you take a week off?
No.
No, none of that.
No.
Yeah. It's well, when people know you, they know that's not your instinct to do it. Right?
It was just, I don't ever want to stop working.
Yeah. I stopped for 2 years. It was a big mistake. I went a bit insane.
I enjoy it. I enjoy it way too much.
I think it's a really good way to live.
I enjoy business building.
Yeah, I think a lot of people need to maybe pick that up a little bit. That it's about the journey, isn't it? Really,
totally.
And make sure you enjoy the journey. So, at what point did you know that OakNorth was going to work?
At what point did I know it was going to work? I can answer that in so many different ways. I can still say that we're still on that journey, right? Because given where our ambition is, we're here against our ambition, which is here, right? We fundamentally want to make it easier for companies to be able to get financing and scale, right? So I think we're just scratching against our mission. Look, I think for us, getting a business to cash flow break even, to profitability, fundamentally means that you've got a business which sustains itself, right? That's a good place to start, right? Because as long as you're burning money, guess what? You have to feed that engine with new money, right? And you can't rely on that, right? So I think getting to break even and full profitability, incredibly important. And after that, it's just a question of like, how large can you make it, right? So I think that in OakNorth terms, we launched in September 2015. It took us 9 months to reach cash flow break even. 24 months, we paid back all the accrued losses.
Amazing. Well, again, you're right now the only digital bank that's actually making money.
We believe so,
which is a big deal, I think. And take this the right way. I was thinking this, so I hope I phrase this right. I feel like you don't get the coverage of like Monzo and Starling and these challenger banks, which I know you're not a fan of well, why?
So first of all, I mean, have immense respect for whatever the Revoluts, Monzos, Starlings, etc. But they are much more consumer focused, right? It's consumer, and with Starling, sort of small micro business, right? We're much more focused on that company between 1 million and 100 million turnover, right? Which is going through the scale up phase rather than the startup phase. And clearly we do have consumer customers who come and deposit with us, but our whole focus from a growth perspective in terms of lending is very much to that mid-size or larger SME. Given that, it's just not, how can I put it, we're not counting millions of customers, because that for us isn't the game. So if you look at the UK market, if you look at the UK small, medium-sized company world, there are 5.5 million SMEs, of which around 5 million are micro businesses, so sort of 1 to 5 employees, and then 500,000 are everything above that, right? And that's where we focus. So by definition, we're focusing on a smaller number of companies, albeit that smaller number of companies constitute a larger portion of the total revenue of the SME cake, right? So I think that's why. But again, that doesn't bother us. Like, we're focused on delighting our customers and building a great sustainable business. And as long as we're doing that, so we're good.
I think there's another great lesson if people are listening carefully. A lot of people, when they're building a business today, they say to me, recently someone was talking a window cleaning business. They're like, I'm going to go on social and start promoting that we're the best window cleaning business in the world. I'm like, don't do that. Just knock on someone's door that's got dirty windows. Like there's that it's almost like an ego playing a role. To do a billboard, oh look, 50,000 people are going to see it.
Yeah.
But to your point, that's not on target for what you're doing. It doesn't make any sense.
So do you know what? When we started the business, right? And we were never going to. We had no marketing department until last year, right? So we spent nothing on marketing. But when we started, and we wanted to start getting clients, guess what? It was hard to get clients, and we said exactly the same thing. Like, what are we doing sitting here? Let's just go out and start knocking on doors. And that's literally what we did. We started just walking the streets and going into sort of different.
It must have been
shops,
weird for them, these businesses, to suddenly see an owner of a bank walk in. They can't get an appointment with their present bank, and suddenly the owner of a bank's walking in. Would you like some money? Can we help you? That would actually make brilliant short form content. Just to say that would actually be brilliant. So how who were your first customers? How did that whole process play out?
I mean, look, our first customers it was actually someone who worked in the social housing space, and it was a great deal. We enabled them to effectively set up a unit, I think with for 6 people or something. It was a small transaction, but it was great. And then I don't exactly remember who the second was, but it's sort of like it was. They weren't necessarily, the first one was someone who was known to someone by the team, but that's where you start. You sort of say, okay, with all your friends and family, you raise money from them, and then you go and sort of say, who needs money, right? So it was a combination of that.
So another great point there. I mean, people listening, like, my best salesperson in my company was actually my accountant.
Okay, you,
not me. No, because she would go and sit with other CFOs and talk about all the businesses we were helping.
Yep.
And all those CFOs would go away and tell their bosses, the CEOs or the marketing folks, and then they call us up.
That's great.
So, your point there about like your family and friend network sometimes can bring you a client, right?
Everyone should be thinking about, like, who can they bring in as a client to the business, right? So that was absolutely one of our things, which was how does everyone actually think about bringing business in?
And so for the business going forward, what's the, I mean, you mentioned there, you kind of described it if people can't see because they might be listening on Spotify, a small thing and this big thing you want to do. I mean, listening to the market size, for example, in the UK, it feels like the UK is not big enough to be, big for you to service. Is there ambitions to go?
So first of all, the UK still, for us, has a lot of runway for us to have an impact, right? I think we're having a small impact, but I think we have a much larger impact, so we can grow multiple fold just in the UK. But to answer your question, yes, we are thinking about other geographies as well.
And is it easy to open up a bank in another market? Back to that. Don't ask anyone in banking because they'll say no. But
if it's easy, is it worth it?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And do you think, I mean, this is controversial, but there's a lot of people predicting the future of banking. And, with decentralization and blockchain technology, dare I say crypto in this day and age, but definitely blockchain technology is changing the game a bit. And I'm pretty sure everyone in the audience here has got a wallet of some sort related to crypto. Well, what do you feel? What do you feel the future is? Is the metaverse a load of rubbish? Is blockchain the future? Are you placing any bets in this space?
So,
so again, this could get on the front page of the newspaper if you say, yes, we're launching our own cryptocurrency tomorrow.
So you are?
No, I'm not. I was talking for you. Though I will.
Okay. So we are not launching our own cryptocurrency. Do I think blockchain technology has very strong use cases in generally in the financial industry? Absolutely. Do I think that digital currencies have a purpose and in sort of form of exchange? Absolutely. Do I think that would necessarily be Bitcoin or something else? Versus a central bank sponsored digital currency? I think that probably everyone can see how a central bank sponsored digital currency would have a lot of credibility. So I'd sort of say absolutely inevitable, has incredible use cases, but is necessarily cryptocurrency XYZ going to be a winner? I have absolutely no view on that, but I have a view that actually a central bank sponsored digital currency is probably one which will have more overall acceptance than not.
And I know, again, this is in some respects your competition, but the institutional bank system is so broken. It's so broken. And, I don't want to put up any future sponsors of this podcast, but I do genuinely think that the whole thing needs, restarting. And no small businesses can get a loan. I mean, that's the gap that you're filling. I do feel like, they tell you to go to a branch to open up a bank account if you're a small business, and it's a nightmare. I mean, do they have a future? These banks, should we all sell our shares and can we buy yours?
So I think if you look at the UK has been incredibly innovative in terms of fintech, right? In terms of thinking about how do you actually look at those inefficiencies and sort of failings and pain points that customers have, and how do you solve for those in a new manner. I think that the amount of innovation which has happened over the last, especially 5, 6, 7, 8 years has been immense. I think the consumer experience has changed dramatically, right, over that period, and has caused the incumbents to also change and sort of wake up to that. I do think that has not happened in the SME space, right? So I think that that evolution, and whether it's the newer entrants who win, the newer entrants who kick the incumbents, and the incumbents do slightly better, and the newer entrants do much better. I think it's a combination of that. I think the size and momentum that the incumbents have cannot be ignored, right? If you play it out on a 5, 10, 15-year basis, I think the landscape does look different. But do I think that we won't have any of the major banks that we have today in the market in that period? I don't. They will still be players in the market, but I do think that their overall market shares will reduce.
Well, I can't see a future for them personally, but anyway, it's a separate point. I guess looking at the opportunity for people listening to start a business today, if all that you know now and all these businesses you've started, if you're advising people listening to start a business, is there any area you think is really something people should look at? I mean, we mentioned blockchain, but is there anything in particular you think, hey, I'd probably do a business in this space?
So the short answer, which I'm going to give to that, is that the space for someone to focus on is the space where they have conviction, right? So it goes back to, like, they need to have the hunger and they need to have the conviction. What they have the conviction over, they will drive to be successful, as long as that conviction is somewhat well placed, right? And I think that is so much more important than, like, again, the often said saying, it's like you'd prefer an A team with a B or C business plan versus an A business plan with a B or C team, right? Because ultimately it all comes down to conviction and execution. The execution comes from high conviction.
Yeah, there's an interesting nuance on that, because I think I always try to give people some practical things that they could think about business idea-wise that is coming down the pipe that they could work on. I mean, let's face it, cars weren't new, but electric cars for some reason were new.
Sure.
So, Elon Musk got involved in that space, and the rest is ChatGPT. I mean, that sort of stuff, the AI stuff. I mean, that is worrying a lot of people, right? Because that's going to, in theory,
generative AI.
I mean, the saying I love, which is that AI is not going to take your job. Those using AI are going to take your job. But what's your view on that?
I mean, look, I think that with any new technology, there's always that fear, right? But if you look at if you look at what's happened to sort of the employment market, I mean, we're sort of record unemployment levels, right? So I think that with any innovation, there are some jobs which may be displaced, but then there are a whole host of new jobs which come, right? And yes, that requires some rebalancing, but on a net basis, if you look over time from the Industrial Revolution to today, every time there's been new technology, people have been fearful of that, right? And I think, as I say, you sit here today with unemployment at record lows.
Yeah. I guess there's always, because my grandfather was made redundant in the newspaper business when they brought the machines in to replace the print setting. And I think what he said to me was stuck with me was that, yeah, there's now jobs looking after the machines that do the printing. But first of all, you need 10% of the workforce compared.
Yep.
Also, they didn't retrain us to do those jobs. They bought the machines from the companies that had... So he lost his job. And I kind of feel like, right, Microsoft just laid off 10,000 people while spending 10 billion, ironically, similar number on chat GPT. It's billions. Yeah, so billions. What did I say? Say a million?
Yeah, you said 10 billion.
10 billion.
10 billion was the number that they rumored to be investing.
It's a lot more.
No, but then they closed the deal and they said billions. They didn't actually specify.
They didn't say how much. Right, they're not allowed to say probably.
Sorry, technically.
But probably 10 billion. But I actually looked through the deal terms, which somehow was made public on a forum I was looking at, and it was actually almost like a loan to the chat GPT founders to like fund the server usage.
Right.
Because it's so astronomical. But I guess
on Azure.
Yeah, exactly. They pay them to pay them back.
It's perfect.
So, but that's kind of clever, isn't it? You stay relevant if you buy the competition, right? But I guess is there something in that about like for example in your business, you must be deploying AI, for example, or technology to decide whether or not someone gets approved for a loan. Right.
We're deploying AI. The AI model does not make the decision for us at all, but we are deploying AI through our process.
Well, there's also stands to reason because there's no way you can process thousands of potential applicants a day manually. It wouldn't be financially efficient to do it anyway.
But again, I go back to the point where we are supporting those larger businesses, right? So we're not actually processing thousands. But your point's valid.
Well, hopefully you will in the future if more and more people realise what a great service you have. But I guess I don't know if you've seen recently the Bank of Dave on Netflix. Have you seen this documentary? Yeah, I think you would love it. And it actually made me cry, which I don't mind admitting. He's fighting the system, and he was the first bank to get a license after the 150-year hiatus of no one. He said,
okay,
I don't know if it's true, so this could be controversial.
Okay.
Netflix got their facts wrong. It will be Prince Harry and the Bank of Dave where the facts are wrong on Netflix. It won't be the first time. But what, is that true? Do you know who the first person was?
Metro Bank was the first, then Hampden Bank in Scotland, and they were the third, and then the third was us.
Oh, really?
So...
Okay, so you know Bank of Dave. Have you heard of this?
I actually don't.
Oh, okay. So
my ignorance.
No, it's not ignorance. I only know about it because someone mentioned to me about his philosophy of like helping the community, which I thought was really interesting. He was personally, as a business person, lending out money locally to try and prop up the economy, to keep people in business, and lending people £500, £1,000. I think I really love the story, and I think you'd love it too. They should make a Netflix story about you.
I don't know about that.
But what I took away from it was one of the key things that I think was really important was this concept of how can we use the financial institutional system to actually genuinely help people, which I really resonated with. He was a person in the system just trying to keep businesses alive that would be good businesses if they were given a little bit of money to get through hard times. And so maybe you should buy Bank of Dave. I think that sounds like a good fit. But there's just literally like a one-man band bank in Barnsley. But I love the story of like, but they tried to block him. Again, it's a Netflix dramatized version of what happened. But did you have any of that institutional resistance? Because he was actually, and it's well documented, this bit I know is true, not just Netflix drama, the banks tried to stop him getting a license.
So I would say... look, I would say we had our interactions with the Bank of England, the regulators, etc., was just all very positive. they wanted to encourage new competition to come in, and they were very tough, but they were very fair. So no, we didn't.
It was fascinating to me in the story. They basically they said yes, he could have a bank license, but he had to raise 15 million to get the bank license. So they basically internally they were like, we won't say no because that would look wrong, but we'll set the bar so high that financially we don't think he'll be able to do it. Is it very expensive to get a bank license?
I mean, if you think about what a banking license enables you to do, it enables you to take consumer deposits, right? So effectively, anyone watching this would be able to go in and put their savings into that bank. So I would say that the requirements are appropriately tough, because in reality, the safeguarding of deposits and making sure that you treat that money appropriately, and you've got the right processes, procedures, etc. internally, it's just so important, right? So I'd say it's appropriately tough.
Fair. A couple of questions for maybe we'll go to the audience listening today and ask if they have any questions. But the one I'm always interested in, and how entrepreneurs like yourself who are running, last time £5 billion valuation was the last time I saw. I don't know if that's more or less or still the same, but a pretty serious valuation.
No comments on valuation.
A big business anyway. Let's say that. And how do you get work-life balance? How does that side, with 4 kids, a wife, as you mentioned, how do you balance it all?
So again, I've said this many a time before, but I think I got told very early in my career that as an entrepreneur, you're juggling lots of balls. All balls are rubber balls, except for one, which is a glass ball, which is your family. So you can never let that drop, right? Because if it drops, it smashes. Everything else bounces back ultimately. And so I always took that to heart. So I try to make sure that I do spend the right amount of time with the family. So generally I'll be back in the evening by 6:30, 7, spend an hour and a half with them, and then get back to whatever work I need to get done. But creating that space on a daily basis is important to have some of that balance. Yeah.
And did you do that in the early years of the business?
In the early years, I was probably less disciplined on that, but I was disciplined on, I used to travel like 260, 270 days a year for the previous business because our clients were everywhere. And we had offices in 14 different countries. So I did pretty much make sure I was back every weekend for at least like one day of the weekend. So that was my equivalent at that point.
Do you ever have any regrets? Any regrets in your life?
No.
It's good. You're living your best life if you don't have any regrets.
I look forwards, right? So it's sort of you live life as an optimist, and you look forward to what's coming. And if you have a concern, the best thing to do is to change something today.
Great advice. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you.